Bonjour, and thank you for joining us this evening for the November installment in the social justice programs that we are offering each month. Tonight's program is We're Still Here, Native Perspectives for the 21st Century, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. Next slide, Amy. This program is brought to you by a group of partners that include the Alliance of Native Nations, which is a subcommittee of the Diversity Action Team of Rock County, Hedberg Public Library, the YWCA of Rock County, Community Action Incorporated, Rock and Walworth County, the Beloit NAACP branch number 3253, I think it is. It's covered up by all your faces. UW-Madison Extension, Division of Extension, Rock County. Thank you to all of those partners. We're able to bring you this series of programs. Okay, Amy, go ahead. All right, we start these programs with a land acknowledgement statement and encourage all of you to do the same thing when you have meetings and programs as well. Ours is, we would like to recognize that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of Native nations. In Wisconsin, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations and one seeking to regain federal recognition. We acknowledge these Indigenous communities who have stewarded this land through the generations and pay respect to their elders past and present. Okay. So first, we want to start with some Zoom etiquette for the presentation. There will be time for Q&A at the end. The program will end at 7:30, and that's when the recording will end. At that time, we will go into the parking lot and open it up for questions. But in the meantime, during the program, if you think of questions, please put them in the chat box. We'll keep track of those questions, and the speaker may actually answer some of them as she's going on through the program. Please, please, please be sure to stay muted in order for us to be able to hear the presenter and be able to stay focused on her. If you do have any comments or questions, again, please put them in the chat portion, and we will keep track of those and make sure your questions get answered. If they aren't answered during the Q&A part, the speaker has agreed to allow people to email her directly if you have questions also. And then we will also be collecting those questions and have her answer those so we can share them at a later time. Again, this is being recorded, and the recording will stop when the program is done at 7:30 in order for us to have a safe space if people want to ask questions. You also, if you want to ask questions, but you're not comfortable putting it publicly in the chat space, you can make those questions private to just me by myself, and I am Renee Bew. So thank you for joining us this evening, and hopefully you will enjoy this program and learn a lot. Amy, you can go to the next slide. Tonight's speaker is Dr. Jeneile Luebke. She is a member of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Dr. Luebke is a postdoctoral nurse research associate at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. She received her early nursing degrees in Bemidji, Minnesota, and her BS and MS nursing from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and her PhD at UW-Milwaukee. She is an enrolled member of the Bad River Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Indians. Her area of research and expertise include intimate partner violence in the lives of American Indian women, community health nursing, and utilization and application of post-colonial indigenous feminist methodologies. She is a survivor of intimate partner violence and is passionate about sharing her knowledge and personal experiences to help support and empower other women to transition to survivorhood. I now present you Dr. Jeneile Luebke.
Thank you, Renee. So I can go ahead and share my screen then.
Yes.
Host disabled participant screen sharing.
Amy, can you allow Jeneile to share her screen, please?
If not, I can make do with.
Amy does have your slides from the center, so.
I just had a couple updates that I had, but
You're a co-host now.
okay.
Thank you, Amy.
All right. Thank you for bearing with me. All right. And I might just move down so I can see. All right. So welcome, everyone. I'm very honored and pleased that we can have so many people with us tonight. I know everyone's had a long day, probably a full work day already. So taking the time to spend the evening with me learning about this topic is very important to me. So I thank you very much for being here tonight. So the title of my presentation, We're Still Here, Native Perspectives for the 21st Century. So again, my name is Jeneile. I'm a postdoctoral nurse research associate at UW-Madison. Oops. Can't use my arrows. There we go. So a traditional Ojibwe welcome is Buju Kiniwea Ogimakwe Nindijnakas Ajijak Nedudem Nada'au Mashki Zibing Nindujaba. So I said, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Woman Leader. I belong to Crane Clan and from Medicine River, which is the traditional name for Bad River. So an acknowledgement or a disclosure that my dissertation research and ongoing research is supported by a gift from the Forest County Potawatomi Foundation. And I would like to dedicate this presentation and ongoing work to the memory of Cozy Medicine Kapdekura. She is a Ho-Chunk woman whose life was taken from her earlier this year on May 16th by her intimate partner. She was a mother to 3 young children, and also to Stephanie Greenspan, who is a Menominee woman who was found this summer. There are many, many other women and men whose lives were taken from them due to violence. But I particularly honor these 2 women because these are things that happened while I was doing data collection for my dissertation. So I also just like to preface this topic with my positionality. To explain why I'm talking about this topic and why this topic is very important to me. So again, I identify as an urban American Indian woman. my ancestry here is listed. I'm enrolled Bad River, but I'm also St. Croix, Le Coudray. I'm French and German. I've been a nurse for about 21 years. The bulk of my nursing experience is in public health and community health and teaching. And as mentioned previously, I'm a recent graduate from UW-Milwaukee, and my dissertation research focuses on intimate partner violence in the lives of American Indian women. And since then, I've transitioned and I'm focusing a little bit more on trafficking policy and advocacy of BIPOC populations, which is Black and Indigenous people of color and American Indian youth. And most importantly, I am a survivor of intimate partner violence. And so this work, my dissertation research and this work has been a source of healing and empowerment for me. So talking about American Indians, where we are, who we are. So if anyone wants to participate in the chat box, if anyone knows how many federally recognized tribes there are in the United States. And I can't even see the chat box from where I am.
So this is Renee, and we have Nana, who said 574. Holly Denning said 573. Katie, 633, question mark.
Awesome. Those are really good guesses. So yes, there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. So sometimes it's just assumed that American Indians were here, or that they, it's something of history where we're living in teepees or igloos. But that's the case is that we are here and we're thriving. We live in urban areas, reservation-based areas throughout the United States. So we now have 574 federally recognized tribes, and there are several other tribes that are going through the process of becoming federally recognized. So that number will change over the years. So using the government definition of American Indian, the government definition is those who are enrolled in a tribe. Each tribe has their standards for who they would recognize as a tribal member. Some tribes have a minimum blood quantum, such as 1/4, or
in the U.S.
It's up to each tribe as to who they enroll in their tribes. Some tribes you have to prove your ancestry through a DNA test. So there are about 5 million people who identify as mixed race, as American Indian and another race, and 2.9 million people in the US who identify as American Indian, or those who are enrolled members of a federally recognized tribe. In Wisconsin, where there's about 68,000 American Indians living in Wisconsin, and this is reservation-based areas and urban areas. About 45% of Wisconsin's American Indian population reside in metropolitan areas, such as Milwaukee, Green Bay, Madison, and some of those surrounding cities. There's about 7,300 American Indians in Milwaukee County alone. So this is traditional territory of the tribes that have been in Wisconsin. So you can see the land that we are on was traditionally Ho-Chunk and Potawatomi land. So if Wisconsin had not been colonized, this is what the tribal land would look like. And so the white spots that you see on this map are what are now reservation or trust land areas. So you can see that's quite a bit different. So each of those white areas represents the 11 federally recognized tribes. And then the Brotherton tribe is the one that is applying or going through the process of becoming federally recognized. The only tribe in Wisconsin that does not have a defined reservation area is the Ho-Chunk Nation. They are, you can see the little arrows and the dots for the Ho-Chunk Nation. Their tribal members are spread out in kind of scattered plots of trust lands, and they are spread out over 13 counties in Wisconsin. So looking at the United States, you can see the blue areas on here are what are now reservation-based areas. So this is where Native Americans were removed and then placed onto reservations. So it's quite a bit different than it used to be. But again, those little blue spots are where Native Americans are now residing if they are living on reservation-based areas, and then again in urban areas as well. So on average, about 68% of American Indians in the United States reside in urban areas, and that does vary by state to state. Some states, there are more American Indians living on the reservations than in urban areas. Some states have higher populations of American Indians, like South Dakota, North Dakota, where some of those cities and states see, you know, between 5 and 10% or even more of American Indians, whereas some states, the population is less than 1%. So moving into the topic of missing and murdered Indigenous women. So I just want to review gender-based violence and how intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking intersect with missing and murdered Indigenous women. So also just to preface too, I refer to, or my research focuses on American Indian women, and the problem of violence and missing and murdered is not just limited to American Indian women. It really impacts American Indian people. But for the sake of this presentation, I focus on women because that is the research that I have done. So I will talk mostly about women, but I just want to preface that I'm not purposely excluding men, or that this isn't a problem, or this problem doesn't impact men, because it does, but that's just what I'm most familiar with. So why this topic is so important, and why I've chosen to really focus my career on this issue as a nurse researcher, is that gender-based violence really impacts the health and well-being of women and people. Aside from obvious issues like physical injury, including strangulation, with the worst outcome being homicide, there are also issues of suicide, maternal mortality related to violence that's inflicted during pregnancy, risk of sexually transmitted infections and HIV. There can be chronic pain, chronic illness, and then of course mental health issues. Anyone who experiences violence is at risk for developing PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, drug and alcohol misuse or abuse, to cope, eating disorders, sleep disturbances, and then other things that impact well-being, such as decreased productivity, missing work, missing school. So all of those things that would impede our ability to thrive and live the best versions of ourselves. So gender-based violence is an issue because it's one of the most serious public health issues occurring in American Indian communities today. Violence against American Indian women is greatest among any other racially defined group. The 2016 NIJ study revealed that almost 85% of American Indian women who were surveyed experienced violence during their lifetime. And that was out of a sample of about 4,200 people in the United States. So it was a survey that included American Indian people in urban, reservation, and rural areas in the United States. American Indian women also experience one of the highest rates of homicide. On reservation-based areas, murder rates are 10 times the national average. Almost half of the women who were murdered were victims of intimate partner violence. That national study also revealed that quite a few or many of the perpetrators of violence were non-native. There are some smaller studies that have come out since this was done and have shown that it's a little bit, there are more Native men who were perpetrators, but it really varied from location to location, urban versus rural or reservation-based areas. I'll talk a little bit about the results of my study that I conducted this spring. My results for about half of the men were identified as American Indian, and half were of other races. So missing and murdered Indigenous women. This is an issue that impacts women globally that identify as Indigenous. So it's not just something that's happening in the United States. This is something that's happening to Indigenous women in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, South America, and in the US specifically, we don't know exactly how many American Indian women have been murdered or missing, simply because we've never tracked the data before. There are a number of very complex reasons that have to do with law and policy that I'll touch on in some upcoming slides. But what we do know today is that we have absolutely no idea how many women this has impacted. We do have some ideas based on the work of Sovereign Bodies Institute, which is an Indigenous-led research group out of California. We know that in 2016, there were 5,712 reports of missing American Indian or Alaska Native women and girls, but out of those 5,700, only 116 of them were actually in the US missing persons database. It doesn't mean that that year there were actually 5,712 women missing or murdered. It just means that there were reports of women or girls that had gone missing. Now, sometimes women can be reported missing more than once in a year. Many women are found that are reported missing. Some of the girls were runaways, things like that. But that at least gives us an idea of how many reports of missing American Indian and Alaska Native women and girls were reported in that one year. it's estimated from the Sovereign Bodies Institute that if we went back to the 1900s, that there have been at least 25,000 American Indian women that have been murdered. So, you know, this is not something that happens like a magic trick. So women are not just disappearing into thin air or being, you know, snatched up. This is an issue that's, you know, very deeply rooted in settler colonialism and an injustice in the way that our federal policies are created that creates a system of oppression. And I'll get into that in the next couple of slides. So how did we get here talking about these intersecting systems of oppression? So there are many very complex root causes that have kind of culminated to this crisis of violence against American Indian women. We have issues of jurisdiction and sovereignty. There's historical trauma. We have distrust of healthcare and social service agencies. There are many, many barriers to seeking and receiving help. We have some of the highest levels of incarceration of any race in the United States. Our Indian Health Service agencies are underfunded. There's many environmental, economic, criminal justice policies that have also contributed to this. So one thing that I really want to highlight is that the violence that occurs against American Indian women, this is not traditional. This is not something that happened prior to colonization. So in pre-colonized Native communities and tribes, violence in domestic violence, sexual assault, things like that did not happen. Women were and still are considered very sacred, givers of life, very valued and cherished. And pre-colonization, American Indian women held high positions of power. They fought alongside men in battle. They were also an integral part of peacekeeping and the balance of life. And this was really for not only because it was a part of their culture, but for survival. So for tribes and Native communities to flourish and be able to thrive through, you know, harsh winters and to keep evolving, they had to have these systems of peacekeeping and balance. And if violence did occur, it was dealt with very swiftly by means of restorative justice. This is something that was documented and observed and envied by early suffrage leaders and missionaries. We've been able to find this through journals that were kept during that time. The suffrage leaders or allies of Native nations envied this matriarchal and egalitarian society and recognized, they were able to recognize the imbalance and the power and oppression of patriarchy, which was the impetus for those early suffrage movements. So thinking about how violence is not traditional and how that has manifested into these high rates of violence today, we know that there have been centuries of sexual violence and trafficking against American Indian women that started during the earliest colonial times, during the earliest contact. It's been documented by missionaries that Christopher Columbus also participated in this, and in rape and trafficking of American Indian women. So colonization and the settler colonialism included their notions of patriarchy, and not just about that power dynamic and relationship between men and women, but also the patriarchy of social systems that are organized around principles of power, control, and domination. There were harmful stereotypes and assumptions made about American Indian women, that they were, savage and exotic. They were sexualized by colonizers, and their voices were silenced if they, tried to retaliate or escape. Their lives were ended, or their children were harmed. So we also know the story of Pocahontas. It's kind of fantasized in Western culture, but it's actually based from Matoka, which was a child victim of trafficking who was taken by her family and used as a sex slave. So that's a part of history that we really don't hear about as we're growing up, but we certainly do hear about those kind of those fantasized or romanticized versions. So I will quickly kind of touch on some of these federal and jurisdictional issues that I mentioned earlier that really have been the impetus for this perpetuation of violence that we still see today. So there are a few major federal policies that were created that really stripped tribes of their sovereignty, which is their ability to self-govern. And some of this was intentional and some of it was unintentional, but the results of that have been pretty catastrophic. So I will touch on each of these things and some upcoming slides here. So the first jurisdictional conflict that was really what set this in motion was Ex parte Crow Dog. This was considered the original jurisdiction conflict between sovereign tribes and federal authorities in 1881. So to Lakota men, Spotted Tail and Crow Dog were in a conflict, and Crow Dog murdered Spotted Tail, and the tribe dealt with this situation in their own way. Through a means of restorative justice, Crow Dog was ordered to care for Spotted Tail's family for the rest of his life, and he was also banished, and he could no longer be a part of tribal affairs. Neighboring non-native communities, so some of the settlers that were around this area were made aware of this and were completely outraged at how it was handled, because the white way to deal with this would be a hanging. And they thought that, they felt threatened by this, that, oh, well, these Indians are murdering each other and nothing's being done about it, so we need to step in and save them from themselves. So this really sparked the first federal policy that was created that actually kind of forced the US legal system onto tribes and set forth that impetus that tribes were then dependent upon the U.S. legal system because they were considered savage or backwards, and they were unable to govern themselves. So that sparked the creation of the Major Crimes Act in 1885. That then placed certain crimes under the federal government's jurisdiction if they are committed by a Native American on tribal land. So this includes things like murder, manslaughter, burglary, robbery, felony child abuse, and neglect. So this act became a stepping stone then to further erode the tribe's abilities to self-govern. And again, this was all sparked by the Western view that, natives were savage and barbaric, and they just, they're backwards and can't take care of themselves, and we have to protect ourselves against these savages. The Dawes Act then was enacted in 1887, which further dismantled tribes, and this was part of the termination and assimilation policies that followed over the next 150 years. So 90 million acres of American Indian-owned tribal land were sold, and this is what forced natives onto reservations, and the settlers wanted the natural resources. They saw this land as valuable, and that, American Indians, they don't understand, these valuable resources that are worth all this money. They're not going to use it, so we're just going to take care of that for them. Boarding schools is also something that happened during this time between the 1860s and as late as 1978 in the United States. So this is where children were taken from their parents, stripped of their culture, their hair was cut, forbidden to speak their indigenous languages. It was basically a way to try to rid them of their savagery. Carlisle was the biggest or largest known boarding school that was open between 1879 and 1918, and approximately 10,000 children from 150 tribes attended this. There were also parochial schools or other religious-based schools that weren't considered boarding schools, but Native children were sent to them, with the last one closing in 1978. And I have a photo off to the side here. I don't know if you can see it very well, but my cousin Matthew was able to find a document that shows how our great-great-aunt Gertie was transferred from the La Pointe Indian School to Carlisle, and she attended Carlisle from 1911 to 1914. It's also documented that she ran away from Carlisle in 1913 and then was found and then returned. So why the boarding schools, or talking about boarding schools, is so significant to this problem is because you have these children that were taken from their families. So you have several generations of children that were not able to learn their indigenous languages, participate in ceremony, and they were forced to adapt to Christian or white ways. There was a lot of trauma that happened at the boarding schools. There was sexual assault, there was physical abuse, emotional, mental abuse. So these are children who then went on to have children who didn't know how to parent their children. And you have these, this intergenerational trauma that perpetuates through generations. Public Law 80 is something that's a little more contemporary. So this is something that was enacted in 1953. This altered criminal jurisdiction on Indian reservations across the country. And this really shifted some of that responsibility from the federal authorities to then the state authorities. So this is something that impacts 6 states in the United States, and Wisconsin is one of them, with the exception of the Menominee Nation. They are exempt from Public Law 280. So it's something that's been very controversial since it's been enacted. It's often misunderstood, it's often misapplied, and has caused quite a bit of jurisdictional confusion. And I will explain that a little bit further in an upcoming slide. Oliphant versus Suquamish tribe. This was a federal Supreme Court case based on an incident that happened in 1973. A non-native man who was living on a tribe, a reservation. He worked on that reservation. He assaulted a tribal police officer. He had a little too much to drink one night and got into a fender bender and came, across a police officer, and he was arrested and detained by tribal police for assaulting an officer and driving while impaired. He challenged his arrest. He felt that since he was non-native, that tribal cops had no authority over him as a non-native man, and he took the case all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed with him. And since that time, tribal courts on reservations do not have the authority to prosecute non-natives for crimes that happen on tribal lands. And so this was one of the biggest turning points leading to increases in violence on reservation-based areas. So this really kind of became open season for us harming Native American women, because non-native men figured out that if you want to rape someone or harm an American Indian woman, just go on to a reservation and their tribal cops won't be able to do anything about it. Only the FBI can, and the FBI really only got involved with major crimes. So if there was a homicide or some kind of severe bodily injury, otherwise no one really bothered with it. So as I mentioned earlier, that national study in 2016 revealed that almost 74% of the violence that was perpetuated against American Indian women were by non-native men. So that's extremely problematic if tribes are unable to protect their women or do anything about this. This is a slide that shows the jurisdictional maze that one must kind of navigate through when trying to figure out how do we deal with the arrest and detainment and prosecution of a perpetrator. So you have to look at, where did this crime happen? What is the race of the perpetrator, the race of the victim? Is this a Public Law 280 state? Is it not? And really depending on the tribe, depending on the state, it could be local, state, federal authorities, U.S. Marshals, FBI, and they do not do a very good job of talking to each other. So a lot of times there could be lost evidence, miscommunication, things slipping through the cracks. So, as you can see from all of this jurisdictional confusion and the erosion of the autonomy and authority of tribes to prosecute these crimes, that's been a major problem. Other things that have contributed to the crisis of MMIW is the Indian Relocation Act. And this is something that was enacted in 1956 that really encouraged American Indians to relocate from reservation areas to cities. There was, marketing and posters and, come move to the city. There's jobs, there's training, there's happy homes. Again, it was this idea that, Indians were, backwards and they're not living life the way that we think that they should live life. So therefore we need to intervene again and get these people off of their reservations and assimilate them to the way that we think they should live. And really, it ended up being a one-way ticket to urban poverty and hardship, because those job training programs, all of the things that were promised weren't there in the cities when Native Americans got there. So as I mentioned previously, some of these consequences, whether they were intended or unintended consequences of limiting this tribal authority, what the United States thought they were doing to help actually harmed. We know till today, Native women remain targets of sexual violence and trafficking. There's still a severe lack of collaboration and communication between all of the different authorities and agencies. There is a lack of reporting of crimes, whether it's from an agency or from the victims themselves. They have felt that, well, why bother? Nothing's going to be done about it anyway. Or when they did report it, they were treated in a very hostile manner, or they weren't believed, or they were actually shamed. There's also gaps and loopholes in some of the laws that we tried to enact to remedy this issue. The Violence Against Women Act, which I'll talk about next, there are major gaps and loopholes in that. So it's been an attempt to kind of get a handle on this situation, but the impact of it has been much smaller than we had hoped or anticipated. So some of the more contemporary contexts in this crisis. So we have had forced sterilization, many tensions with law enforcement. We've had issues with the foster care system and social work systems. So we know that in the 1970s, the Family Planning Services and Population Research Act of 1970 led to 25 to 30% of all American Indian women being sterilized. And it was not from them exercising their reproductive rights. This was coercion and forced consent by Indian Health Service doctors and nurses. That, you have to have a tubal ligation, or we're going to have to take your children away, or they went in for to have their appendix out and came out with a bonus hysterectomy. So this was something that was happening up through the middle of the 1970s. So also with the foster care system in the 1970s as well, we know that almost 25 to 30% of all Native American children in the United States were being placed into foster homes, adoptive homes, or institutions. And this again was this continuation of oppression where we thought that they would be better off with non-Native families because their families are too dysfunctional or backwards to take care of their children. And this is something that impacted my own family. My great-grandmother had 4 children, and they were adopted into non-Native families. And my grandmother was adopted into a family that was in Milwaukee. So it's really something that impacts families. It separates families and keeps them from being a part of their own culture and kinship systems, and all of those things that keep us resilient and strong. So I'll just touch a little bit on another issue that's happening that really perpetuates this crisis is the continuation of our colonial settler influence of patriarchy and capitalism. So we think of things in ownership, property, real estate, wealth, natural resources, and our energy policies have directly contributed to further land degradation. So we know our oil pipelines, mining and fracking, this has caused a major disruption in some of the reservation and rural areas in which many American Indians live. With the mining, the mining and the fracking and the damming, in order to carry all of those out, there's been an influx of non-Native workers, temporary workers that live in what are called man camps. And so when you have an influx of thousands of workers coming into these small tribal communities, they get lonely, they go out to the bars, they want to drink or whatever they want to do to unwind at the end of a long day. And they also bring a lot of money with them. And so many Native women have kind of used that as a way to survive. So whether it's through sex work or being trafficked, there have been just an alarming number of reports of sexual assault and physical abuse in these areas that we've had mining and pipeline projects on in First Nations communities in Canada, the United States. So what to do about this? I'm almost running out of time. So we have done a tremendous amount in the last few years. The crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women has really been gaining momentum and gaining more awareness through mainstream media and Indigenous-led efforts. So we've created a federal task force. We have Savannah's Act, which was just passed in October. It requires the Department of Justice to review, revise, and develop law enforcement and justice protocols to address issues of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The Wisconsin Department of Justice just formed a task force here in Wisconsin to address this crisis. And the Violence Against Women Act, which has currently expired, but I'm hoping that with our new president-elect that we'll have some, bipartisan support to try to get this passed. In a nutshell, what the Violence Against Women Act has done is it has recognized the disproportionate violence that has occurred for all women in the United States, but a big piece of this is also that it recognized these high rates of violence against American Indian women. And it also recognized that tribes do have inherent power to criminal jurisdiction over their own areas. So it did restore some of that lost sovereignty to tribes to prosecute non-natives for violent crimes. Now it's been a little complicated because not all tribes are participating in this. In fact, only 18 tribes out of the 574 have become voluntarily compliant, and this is really complex, and I could spend a whole semester talking about this, but they have to have the ability to carry out due process. So a court-appointed attorney, a jury made up of Native and non-Native peoples, their court system, judge, you know, it takes a lot of money and resources to carry out due process for crimes. So many of the tribes are unable to do that. The Violence Against Women Act of 2018 further restored any gaps and loopholes. However, it has not passed the Senate, so we are still waiting for this to be passed. So as of now, it has expired. There's other legislative action going on. There's proposed funding for to solve cold cases, hire more tribal police, hire more FBI agents to work on these cases. There's many Wisconsin-led or Native-led initiatives. There's the Menominee Nation Women's Leadership Cohort. There's a few agencies in Milwaukee that are led by Indigenous people or women. Wise Women Gathering in Green Bay. There's healing circles, and there are so many individuals in our state, too many to name, that are working on the ground, working as advocates, working with victims and their families and survivors. And so there's a lot of energy being put into this cause, and this work really has to be Indigenous-led. We have to lead the movement to heal our people. So I'll just spend a minute, since I'm running out of time, talking about what I'm doing as an Indigenous nurse researcher on this topic. This was my dissertation topic, intimate partner violence. So I carried out a study this spring. I did a qualitative study, so that just means that instead of collecting a bunch of numbers, I really wanted to focus on the individual lived experiences. So I met with 34 women individually and did a one-on-one interview that lasted a few hours. And I really wanted to better understand these individual lived experiences with intimate partner violence, sexual assault, and trafficking. It addressed a gap in the literature because there were no studies that were published about intimate partner violence in Wisconsin, which I found alarming. So that is one thing that I have done, and I'm still in the process of publishing the results of my study, so that's in process. But again, these are just the aims of my research. I really wanted to try to understand what was going on in the local context, identify those barriers to care, trying to find out how can we best serve and help our victims and survivors and their families through their words and their recommendations, and so that initiatives and interventions can be survivor-led. We know that COVID-19 is happening, and this is something that is also greatly exacerbating violence in our communities for American Indian women and all women. We know that the reports of violence are increasing. Domestic violence related homicide is going up in our state, and we have our domestic violence shelters and some of our other services are running at limited capacity because of COVID. So there are needs that are not being met right now. And, you know, we do have women who are in need and may not be able to get it right now. So it's very distressing to know that that's happening. Lastly, another example of what we're doing is applying as an academic, applying for grant funds, and not just funds that are going to you know, fund researchers, but we wanted to apply for a service grant. So we were awarded a $2 million grant this spring. And what we really wanted to do was address sexual assault and try to bridge the gap between the services that were lacking. So with that money, we've created a tribal sexual assault response team, and we're hiring Indigenous advocates and sexual assault nurse examiners in the Milwaukee area, and then areas up north in Wisconsin, to try to bridge that gap, so that women don't have to travel so far if they want to get a sexual assault exam. And that advocacy piece is really important. So when someone is experiencing violence or a crisis, there's someone there that's going to advocate for them and support them and be able to help them navigate through some of these really confusing pathways as far as reporting to police or social service agencies and things like that. So they know that someone's going to have their back. So you can, as allies and advocates, that you're all here today. So I think that's an awesome start to allyship and advocacy. You can help raise awareness and spread the word. Most importantly, you can write to your legislators, contact your legislators. They want to hear from you. Encourage them to support and pass the Violence Against Women Act. Also, you know, on the front lines, oppose these energy policies that are destroying Native lands and communities. You know, we can't do this alone. You do not have to be Native American in order to you know, participate in this activism. So we need allies and advocates, whether you're Indigenous or Black, white, whatever. So I just encourage you to be a part of this movement. I have resources here if you know of someone in need. Encourage them to get some help. And then there's also, if you want to learn more about this topic, these are videos that I have shown my students in the past and that I highly recommend. It's kind of a mixture. Peace River Rising is a really good one that talks about some of these energy policies and land degradation. There's also a few more that are just about MMIW, like Silent No More. Highway of Tears is something that's based out of First Nations in Canada. So I encourage you to watch those if you want to learn more about this topic. So I've left 23 minutes for questions. So hopefully people will have some questions that I'll be able to answer and talk about.
We do actually have some questions, Jeneile, but first, Amy, if you want to switch back to my slides. And one of the questions that was asked was about the list of resources being shared, Jeneile. And what I would like to say is this program has been recorded, and it will be available next week on the Hedberg Public Library YouTube channel. So all of those resources, and then the ones that we're going to see right now will also be available that way. All right.
Renee, would you like for me to end the recording?
No, not yet, Amy. Because I want to make sure that these last slides of mine are on the recording as well. Thank you. So Jeneile provided several ideas of things that you can do. These are a few other ones. There are lots of resources if you are an educator, and some of them are on here. I repeated some of the things even that Jeneile had mentioned in her presentation, but there are some other ones, such as reaching out to the Native nations in Wisconsin through the Great Lakes Intertribal Council to find out what exactly do they need, and how you can help. Amy, you can go to the next slide. And I'm a relationship person, so number 6 is really important, building relationships with Indigenous women and their communities, and asking them directly what you can do to help. And there again are other items on here. She also mentioned contact your legislators, and I actually included in here the link to the Rock County Board of Supervisors. So that is just one local way. And Amy, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Then we also want to make sure that we're including youth, because youth also can make a difference and can help out. And here are just a few suggestions of things that they can do. Some of them are the same. I did list in here, somebody mentioned that they had never seen the acronym MMIW. That is one of many acronyms and kind of hashtags that you can use to find more information about missing and murdered Indigenous women. Someone asked again about the resources. This is all going to be available on the recording that will be posted in the Hedberg Public Library YouTube channel. And then Amy, you can go to the next slide. So next steps, Jeneile mentioned some. I've mentioned that you can watch this or share this recording with other people. Also, just look at the Diversity Action Team website or partner Facebook pages for upcoming events and how to register for those events. I listed a few here. For example, on Monday, November 23rd at 5:30, we will have Empty Plates. It's Native Voices and Thanksgiving. That also is via Zoom. And then our next program in this particular series is View from the Margin, Life in the Non-Majority, and that will be Thursday, December 17th at 6:30 via Zoom. I also just wanted to let you know, this particular program is my baby in a way, because it is the first in a series that I will be doing through the library with the same name. We're Still Here, Native Perspectives for the 21st Century. So you can look for those programs to come up. They will start in 2021. And if anyone is interested in the Allies of Native Nations, our next meeting is Tuesday, November 24th at 6 p.m. via Zoom. And you can find that information on the Diversity Action Team's website on the Allies of Native Nations page on the website. So I think